All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our second installment of the Porta Sophia Archival Researcher Network info sessions. For the sake of time, we're going to get started right at noon. And I'm Amanda Pratt. So if you were here last time, I kind of introduced myself. You'll hear a little bit more from me today. I'm on the data and curation team at the nonprofit Psychedelic Prior Art Library, Porta Sophia, working on the archival end of things. And so if you're here, that probably means that you're maybe somewhat aware of that initiative. We're working on and also hopefully interested in participating in the ARN and or at least learning more about Porta Sophia. So just a little bit of Zoom etiquette. I think I have this meeting set up so everyone is automatically muted. If you keep that mute on throughout our presentation, we'll have time for Q&A at the end. We'll all kind of be moderating the chat as we pass back and forth presenter duties. So feel free to pop questions in the chat and they can kind of accumulate there. And if there's logistical questions, we'll kind of address them as they come up too. So the Archival Researcher Network is a great opportunity to really activate historical expertise to make a difference in the patent system. And, as I said last time, this system is really, for better or worse, one that stands to shape the landscape of access for the future of psychedelics. So we're really happy to have this opportunity to engage with folks interested in what we're up to and at the same time provide this series of primers that will hopefully give you a better sense of how you might be involved. And so kind of a brief overview of our info sessions. For those of you that weren't here last time, our first info session, if you want to go to the next slide, Sisi, featured our resident lawyers, Dave Casimir and Tom Eisenbarger, and they spoke about the basics of patent law and prior art. All info session recordings, including this one, will be available after the fact via the Porta Sophia YouTube channel and also linked on our landing page for the Archival Researcher Network in the next week or so. I'm also sending emails to registrants after each info session with our suggested reading list and other pertinent announcements as they kind of emerge. So after today, we've got 2 more information sessions. You want to go to the next one? So the next one is actually tomorrow, featuring Charles Raison, and he will speak about psychedelic science, kind of the least you should know if you're going to be participating in the Archival Researcher Network about psychedelic science. That'll be at 12 Central. And then the last one, but certainly not least, will be Lucas Rickert a week from tomorrow at noon Central, talking about psychedelic archival research. And I'll talk a little bit more about that and why you might want to go to that specifically based off of what I kind of go over with the Archival Researcher Network today. And so if you want to, Sisi or Shahin, if you want to drop our YouTube link in the chat, you can kind of check there for updates. Right now it's only got a couple of videos up there, but these info sessions will all be there as well. And so today's topic is a really practical and important one for orienting potential participants in the ARN. If you can go to the next slide. Yeah, there we go. And the main objective today is to guide you all through the process the data team goes through in order to build our psychedelic prior art library and actively intervene in the prior art search stage of the patent prosecution process, which is a mouthful. To that end, we've kind of broken things down so that we're covering 3 main topics today. I'll read our bios here in a second, but Sisi Lee, you okay, Sisi?
Sorry, I'm trying to drop the link in the chat, but
oh, it's okay. I can do it after. Sisi Lee will start off by sharing an overview of the Porta Sophia workflow. Then Shahin Shams will talk about our direct action approach with third-party submissions. And then I'll wrap up with more specifics about how we see the ARN fitting into our workflow, as well as kind of potential benefits of participating in the Archival Researcher Network. And again, we're hoping to have some good time for a Q&A afterward as well. So just kind of quick introduction of the Porta Sophia data team bios. I am again Amanda Pratt. I'm a PhD candidate who researches, and I'm in English with a concentration in composition and rhetoric and a minor in science and technology studies, who researches psychedelic rhetoric at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. As data archivist at the Psychedelic Prior Art Library, Porta Sophia, I work to integrate archival research into our prior art library, in part by engaging with this wonderful network of archival researchers who study psychedelics. I'm also a founding member of the Interdisciplinary Psychedelic Activism and Environmental Research Working Group, sponsored by the UW Center for Culture, History, and Environment. colloquially known as CHE, an advisory member of UW's Transdisciplinary Center for Research in Psychoactive Substances, and a member of the Madison Psychedelic Society Community Group. Shahin Shams is the Porta Sophia data curator. She identifies psychedelic-focused documents and scientific patent literature, curates prior art for the Porta Sophia online library, and researches companies applying for psychedelic patents. Additionally, she assists in generating third-party submissions to the USPTO, directly addressing bad patent applications at the federal level. She is currently a biomedical engineering PhD candidate at the University of California, Davis, with a scientific background in pharmacology and molecular biology. After defending her dissertation, she plans to attend law school to become a patent attorney specializing in clinical pharmacology and advanced biologics. And last but not least, Sisi Lee, who's going to get us started in just a second here. PhD is a data architect and the data team lead at Porta Sophia. This 501c3 nonprofit simple search tool for innovators and patent reviewers to find relevant prior art in the field of psychedelics. Sisi received her PhD in neuroscience from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where her research focused on better understanding the epigenetic and molecular mechanisms underlying depression and anxiety disorders. Her passion for the field of mental health, and specifically in advancing psychedelic treatments of psychiatric disorders, led her to the data architect position with Porta Sophia. She previously worked for 3 years at as an R&D research scientist at Gregor Diagnostics, a prostate cancer diagnostic startup. And so we'll just kind of each go through these topics, starting with Sisi, who's going to give an overview of the Porta Sophia workflow.
All right, thank you, Amanda. All right, so first I'd love to demystify the data team's workflow on how we build the psychedelic prior art library. So we start off with tracking psychedelic patents and applications, both domestic from the USPTO and then also internationally on the WIPO. We search for all patents and applications that are related to psychedelic compounds. We have these 28 compounds currently on our short list, and that is expanding with time. And so for this short list, we've already completed this initial broad search on 11 out of the 28 of the most common compounds. And so that work is still being built and our database is still growing. And so the next section is we evaluate these patents and derive themes from them. So we sort these patents into a 3-tiered system, tier 1 being the most important, based on their threat to the psychedelic landscape. And our evaluation criteria include things like how broad are the claims? Does it have potential to block the field or limit access to psychedelics? What is the ownership? Is it owned by a party likely to cause problems for the field? Is there data or at least limited data? What's the clinical relevancy? And then what is the function of the psychedelic drug in the patent? And Shahin will expand more upon our criteria in the next section. And in addition to these evaluations, we also sort these patents into bins. Bins with themes like delivery/formulation, derivatives, drug combinations, method of manufacturing, or method of treatment. So each patent could fall into one or many of these bins. And so after that, we assign these patents with targets, themes, or keywords that are necessary to identify prior art. For example, a keyword, a theme could be psilocybin microdosing for bipolar 1 disorder, or they could be shorter keywords like depression, allergies, or synthesis. And for a select few patents that are just in the right time frame and circumstances, we can directly take action by filing a third-party submission on those patents. And again, Shahin will talk more about this in the next section. So after we've evaluated the patents and derived the themes, we jump to find and curate prior art for these patents. So step 1 is just a very broad web-based search, and we're looking for previous patents, journal articles, conference presentation material, websites, blogs, basically anything that is easily accessible that we can find that falls into prior art for these keywords, themes, targets. And then step 2 is then to identify the remaining targets that we haven't been able to find prior art on, and then look in the digital material archival collections we have access to, and then eventually also to be able to send out a monthly target of these ones that we can't find easy prior art access to the Archival Researcher Network to also help us out in gathering prior art. And step 3 is to just then curate these prior art and again, tag them with targets, themes, keywords. We identify excerpts of quotes that are relevant to certain claims. And then we can also create short and long summaries of these prior art. So that it makes these prior art more digestible and easily accessible to examiners who might be looking at themes. And so after these prior art are curated, then we go to the, we can then add them to our prior art library. We can upload these curated prior art to the Porta Sophia website, prioritizing this entire process by the tier ranking of the patents. So focusing on tier 1 first. Some other things that we're in the process of building for our online library is a searchable compound timeline, starting with 5-MeO DMT. That would include within the timeline legal, scientific, and historical archival events that eventually someone could search through these timeline and extract the information they need. Additionally, we're also working on a community page where it's a community submissions bounty page on the Porta Sophia website where Porta Sophia or someone from the community, an examiner, say they're going through a patent exam, reviewing a patent and having a hard time finding prior art, that they can submit a request for prior art on our community submissions page, a bounty for this type of prior art, and then both within the Porta Sophia library, and then our community could help them search for prior art for those specific targets. So that is an overview of our workflow.
Great, thanks so much, Sisi. So yeah, we're really envisioning the Archival Researcher Network to be intervening at that 3rd stage in the finding and curating prior art, specifically helping to expand our database to be more inclusive of archival sources. And if you didn't come last time and you have questions about patent law and prior art and how we kind of fit into that, I would definitely recommend going back and watching those recordings once they come out. And happy to answer questions in the chat if anything comes up. But we'll switch over to Shahin now, who's going to talk about our third-party submission process.
All right, hello everyone. And I'm going to be telling you about the direct action approach that we take in order to then combat bad patents in this space, which is the third-party pre-issuance submission. So this is a mechanism in which the USPTO allows individuals and entities to submit relevant prior art, the form of patent documents, journal articles, books, presentations, pamphlets, pretty much anything you can imagine, for consideration during patent examination process. And it's a very powerful tool that allows a separate party to play a direct role in the patenting process. So when we are considering an application as to whether we're going to want to submit a third-party submission for it, there are several features that we want to take into consideration. The first of which being the claims. So are these claims overly broad? And are they attempting to sequester information from the public domain? We then take a look at the applicant. So is this a repeat offender? Have they maybe had a history of seed applications? So that means that if they get a patent application granted within this space, whether it be narrow or somewhat broad, would they then try to file and expand upon that to take up more real estate in that space? And is the applicant an entity with a larger footprint, whether that be a larger war chest of sorts, or do they have a larger role in the therapeutic space alone? And what is the entity's focus? Are they maybe venturing into a new scope, or is this something that's going to be the core of their indications setup moving forward? We then take a look in the patent itself to see if there are any examples presented. So does it contain an example of data that support the scope of these claims? Many of them do not. Then it's the threat that this patent may pose. So would this application, if granted, restrict research and access to this therapeutic or this therapeutic application? And finally, the time frame. So there is a limit as to whether we can intervene or not. So is it within the window allowed by the USPTO for a third-party submission to take place? So that is the latter of whether it's 6 months after this publication has, or this application has been published, or whether there's been an office action on this case already. So a good example of the kind of case that we're trying to go after is this one that was an application by CamTech. This is document number 2021-0085-671, which is a part of a series of psychedelic-focused patent applications filed by this company. It had very broad claims that encompassed well-known and established information. A few examples are on your screen underneath the title of claims, i.e. an example being composition comprising a combination of a first serotonergic drug and a second serotonergic drug, which could be psychedelics or any drug that is currently existing that can act on the serotonin system whatsoever. It's overly broad. It's already been very well established, and I'll show you how we take those claims down shortly. This application likewise had no data to support the claims that were presented. And if granted as it stands, this application would have a significant impact in psychedelic research and therapeutic spaces. So when we're actually looking at the physiology, if you could say that, of a third-party submission, first we have all the identifying information of the patent application, and then a list of the curated references that were then cited in order to then combat these claims. We then present a claims chart in which each individual claim that is listed in the application is provided, and then we cite textual evidence that directly combats the scope and the novelty innovation of that claim. So a very good example, again, being a combination of a first serotonergic and a second serotonergic drug, when from this publication in 2001, from a more of a sociological approach, we see that it is very common, even in the more recreational space, that individuals combine ecstasy and LSD very frequently, which both act on the serotonin system. Similarly, they're addressing psychological disorders, even in their own recreational use, of trying to alleviate depressed mood, which is something that this claim at the bottom, claim 18, is also suggesting that their patent can be used for. So moving forward, oh, sorry about that. Sorry, one more time, Sisi, next slide. Sorry, it's my computer that's doing it. All right, so the impact of these third-party submissions is that it puts invaluable information in front of examiners whose decisions impact the scope of an entire field of research. And it actually motivates the applicant to regroup and restructure their claims around the information submitted in order to keep this application alive. It costs companies a lot of money to submit patent applications, so they want to see them move forward, or at least given due consideration. So it forces them to stay within the bounds of the innovation that they've presented. So for this claims chart that I just previously showed on the last slide, we submitted our third-party submission in the middle of November of last year. And even before the USPTO let them know that they had to revise their claims, the applicant themselves went in and made revisions in order to then stay within the bounds of their own innovation, just within a month. So you can see that the power of this is just putting them on blast in a way to let them know it's like, hey, we are watching you, and just try to keep it ethical, okay? We want to make sure that everybody has a chance in order to participate in this space. And this is where we really need your help. So in the previous slide where I was showing the list of different pieces of prior art that we used in order to combat this applicant, we were using books, we were using journal articles, we were using web pages, so blog postings that were made 10, 20 years ago. And these compounds have been indicated to address these psychological and physical disorders for centuries. And now overzealous individuals want to then try to privatize that knowledge and kind of gatekeep it. So they can be very easily, as we have demonstrated, be held at bay by documents that are either in the internet or also that are sitting on the shelves of archives. We just need the individuals that are familiar with and have expertise in this space to participate and ensure that we can further protect this scope of therapeutic research. So we're activating the power of historical knowledge in order to then make this space more equitable for everybody involved.
Great, thanks so much, Shahin. Hopefully that gives you a sense of, yes, we are a psychedelic prior art library that's collecting resources for USPTO to kind of go in and find prior art on their own will, but we're also kind of selectively actively intervening in some of these more egregious claims. So I'm going to talk really about keep an eye on the time here, want some time for Q&A, but really about the ARN, so the Archival Researcher Network, the timeline, and some opportunities for you all if you were to be involved. So I'll just kind of breeze through this, and we can definitely talk more. This is all on the call for proposals. It's on our website if you haven't already seen it. So we are doing these information sessions throughout the month of February. We've got 2 left to go. And the real purpose for that is to give people a sense of, what they need to know in order to commit to participate or to kind of take that first step. And so, so February 28th, we're going to have our first kind of form due where we're asking potential participants to RSVP. And really that's just RSVPing to 2 things, to the Archival Researcher Network, kind of taking a first step into that, and then also the kickoff event. And so March 2nd, 2022, this is all 2022, we will kind of communicate logistics to that ARN. So by committing to being in the ARN or RSVPing to be in the ARN for this first phase, it's basically saying like, I want to be on the list of people that Porta Sophia is going to reach out to with this list of targets for this first kind of run for the kickoff event. So we're going to communicate kickoff event prior art targets. Then also the process for sharing this kind of crowdsourced archival prior art, as well as a link for the next follow-up form. And then April 4th, so about a month later, you'll have these targets. And by April 4th, we want you to kind of follow up with us and let us know what you're interested in researching, and also identify to us if you're interested in giving a spotlight talk at the kickoff event. So you'll have an opportunity to submit an abstract for that. April 18th, we intend to communicate decisions on spotlight talks to those applicants. And then our kickoff event starts off on June 1st with a workshop with Stephanie Schmitz, who is here today, I believe. Yep. And she's going to give a kind of hands-on virtual workshop that's going to dive into some of the collections at the Betsy Gordon Psychoactive Substances Research Collection at Purdue University. And she is the archivist there. And then June 2nd and 3rd, we'll have a kickoff event. We'll have keynote speakers, some roundtables, spotlight talks, and we'll have just a great opportunity to kind of come together and see what kind of archival prior art we have started to crowdsource for this. And then beyond July 22nd, we'll have some ongoing opportunities to support Porta Sophia. We're thinking about, at the very least, kind of a regular message that says, okay, here are some of the targets we're looking at right now based on some of the patents that have emerged in the last month or whatever. Does anyone have anything here? And so if you want to go to the next slide, I kind of want to talk through a few different scenarios for different places you might be when you see some of these targets, right? So I feel like this is our go-to example in the call, but for example, one target might be, we're looking for prior art on the treatment of bipolar 1 disorder using psilocybin, right? And so first you might receive the target and you know that you are not interested in pursuing it, right? So it might be outside your scope of practice. You might be unsure of where to find archival prior art, or you might be uninterested in finding it. And so you don't have to do anything else, right? You can just kind of ignore those targets and wait for the next ones to come along, and hopefully there's something that you want to grab onto there, right? In the second camp, you receive the targets and you know that you're interested in pursuing it. That might be for a few different reasons. You might know of archival prior art already, right? That you've already done research with. You might have a pretty good idea of where to find it, but you also might just be interested in pursuing it because you're interested and you're maybe not sure where to find it. I encourage those of you that are kind of maybe thinking you might be in that camp that have like sort of less experience with archival research to register for Luke's info session. So Luke is here today. Luke Rickert's going to give a session on psychedelic archival research based just sort of like the least you should know about what it takes to do psychedelic archival research. And then you can also attend the workshop with Stephanie Schmitz as well, which is really going to be geared at professionalizing people into getting to kind of develop expertise through participation in the Psychedelic Archival Researcher Network. And also you can kind of indicate on the follow-up form if there's a target that you're interested in and you're not sure where to find that prior art, and we can kind of advise and make connections to others that are working in similar fields or similar places. And I think no matter where you are in that scope of scenarios, you might need funding to pursue targets. We are going to be rolling out soon research and travel grants to help support this work. And those are really going to be geared at supporting graduate students and folks from the BIPOC community to kind of support underrepresented researchers in this space. And we're running short on time here, but just last, there's a lot of potential opportunities I think that the Archival Researcher Network can offer you if you are interested in moving forward. So we've talked about sharing short essays related to prior art that you found on the Porta Sophia website, publishing longer open access essays in a special issue of the History of Pharmacy and Pharmaceuticals, which we envision to kind of come out of the kickoff event. We're happy to compensate for open access fees on Porta Sophia related research that's published in journals behind paywalls. Again, collaborating to kind of develop sources of graduate student funding to support Porta Sophia projects. That's something we can kind of work together to think about how to best professionalize and support graduate students that want to do this work. And then again, connecting with other participants to develop mutually agreed on projects. And like I kind of started off with is this monthly email with a list of targets for prior art searches on emergent patent applications. And so I'll stop there. We've got about 5 minutes for Q&A. Thank you all so much for coming. I'm super happy to answer any questions. If you go to the call for proposal, my email is there. Many of you have probably been emailed by me already. And I'm happy to kind of open up for questions at this point. Feel free to unmute yourself. You should have that ability. And or pop questions in the chat. And I can also kind of share thoughts on common questions that we've gotten already too. And to kind of, maybe I'll just kind of go off of that. If you want to go back one slide. Sisi. Yeah, there we go. So I think, you know, we said in the call, people that would be good fits for the Archival Researcher Network are those that have a good handle on the history of psychedelics, right? And the real bonus and the extra ideal qualification would be to have also experience or expertise in archival history or archival research in that area, right? However, I do recognize that we're kind of getting a lot of interest from folks that may not have that expertise or may have like bits and pieces where they have the psychedelic science expertise, but maybe not the archival or maybe the historical, but not the science, right? Or specific to psychedelics, all kinds of things. And so I think there are those opportunities to kind of develop your expertise through participation in this network. And I'm happy to talk about that. I think a really good place to start if you're not super savvy with the scientific component here that might be necessary to understand some of these patent targets or claims is the session tomorrow with Chuck Rayson. And then if you're not super, if you don't have the experience with the archival research component, definitely Luke's session next week would be a good place to start for that, as well as, again, that workshop with Stephanie Schmitz, who we're really kind of gearing that towards graduate students who don't really have experience with psychedelic archival research. All right. All right.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, everybody. So what, I'm just curious about this. When you find prior art that might be relevant, like how deep, how detailed does it have to go? Like, do you really pick out one sentence, or how do you know it's really on target? Is that where like the science and psychedelic expertise plays a role? Because I can see myself finding a relevant article and being like, oh yeah, using MDMA to treat PTSD. Oh, that's easy. That's just like that. But I'm imagining it's a little bit more complicated.
Yeah, I mean, I think it can be, and this is something we definitely consult with legal about because they're the ones that really know what the patent office is going to consider evidence, right? And so it's this like tricky triangulation sometimes. And I think Dave spoke a little bit during the info session last time about how one of the strategies to kind of take advantage or exploit the limited resources of patent examiners is really to kind of make those claims more confusing than they need to be, right? So instead of just saying treating, like you're saying, psilocybin or MDMA for treatment-resistant depression, saying like using a drug that activates this receptor, right? And that kind of way. And so then in those cases, we just decode it and say, okay, well, they're talking about MDMA does that. So like this works for that, right? And so I think depending on the nature of the claim and the specificity, some of the dosage ones are kind of tricky. So it'll be like a range of doses and you kind of have to just like, you know, some of them are easier than others to find, right? And you can kind of like estimate a little bit. But I think it varies depending on what the target is. And many of them are pretty straightforward.
It's actually a dosage was a very good example, Amanda, because a lot of the times we're working with purified compounds when it comes to those that are listed within patent applications. However, a lot of these compounds, for example, psilocybin, have been taken in mushroom form. So instead of doing a purified dosage of this drug, we're taking X grams of mushrooms. So that's actually something we've been doing in this last third-party submission, is taking a look at the psilocybin concentration within those mushrooms that has been documented for several decades now, going back to the 1970s, 1980s, and then presenting both of those citations. One, individuals with this disorder taking X grams of mushrooms, and then using that conversion rate of X amount of psilocybin per gram of mushroom, and then presenting that to the USPTO, which is also a viable way of kind of usurping that highly specific, I think it was a 0.143 milligrams of psilocybin. Well, that's within the range that people have historically taken if we're looking at it from a mushroom standpoint. So it's presenting it in that format. It's a little bit of a workaround, but there's ways that you can establish that it's a non-obvious approach.
Yeah, and I recognize we're at time here, so if you have to go, that's totally fine. We can stick around, I think, all of us for a few minutes if others have questions. And Luke just left, and I think I'll ask his question anyway for him because I think it's a good one. But the question that he put in the chat was, how regularly will you send out targets for the formation of the ARN, monthly or based on egregious patents or both? We're still a new organization. I think it's important to kind of say that, like, we're still in our first year. And so we're kind of figuring out what's going to work. I think we've floated the idea of having like kind of a monthly email blast where it's like, here are the targets that are most, I think as Sisi talked about earlier, we have like sort of tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 targets. So we'll have to kind of decide how to best utilize the Archival Researcher Network, whether to something we've talked about is like, we don't want to overwhelm people with, our giant spreadsheets of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of targets, but we also want to make sure that people can find a way in, right? So I think we're still going to try to work out that balance, and it will be somewhat emergent, but we're thinking maybe monthly. And then if there are kind of real egregious ones that come up, maybe a special edition or something like that. And I'm going to stop recording, and then people will be welcome to continue to talk here. And also we can always continue conversation in the YouTube comments section too.
I have a question.